Welcome to Lair the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, another in my series of what I call heavy thoughts. This is where I take a moment to share some things that have been weighing on my mind. So the topic for today is genre names and tags. Do we really need them? Are they necessary? Are they a necessary evil? I actually made a video on this topic way early in my channel and I never uploaded it. And then the quality of it, because I used to use a different camera, was so terrible that I just thought I'm going to hold off on this. But what inspired me to do it was one of the first videos that I did on my channel was my 5 favorite hair metal bands. And there were a number of people that commented about how they didn't like the hair metal name and tag. And I do see this pop up in various videos where people will say, oh, why do we have to call it this? Why can't we just say it's all heavy metal or it's all rock and roll? And it got me thinking, and I know that there are people out there, and I myself too sometimes, where I do get annoyed when I go to read about some band I've never heard of before, and in their description they've got 7 different tags after their name. They're deathcore, gent, grind with a Boston beatdown core, rockabilly, folk influence or something. You're like, what? What is this? It can become cumbersome and overbearing when you have all these subgenres of subgenres of subgenres. So I just thought I would talk about it. And in some ways, I think that it is necessary. And the reasons why I think it's necessary for us to label things is for a few different reasons. One of them being that rock and roll has been around long enough now that it has splintered off in so many different directions. If you went into a record store in the 70s, in the rock section, yeah, you had things that were different. You might have Simon and Garfunkel in the rock section, along with Deep Purple and Boston and Fleetwood Mac. But as time went on, and then when heavy metal came onto the scene, for instance, even in the early days of heavy metal, the late 70s, the early 80s, when the term heavy metal really started to be used and ascribed to particular bands, you didn't have that many different things. You had rock, you had hard rock, you had heavy metal, you had punk rock. But as time went on, all these subgenres started splitting off, and there started to be becoming more and more within these genres. Let's take heavy metal, for instance. As the 80s rolled on, you had thrash metal, you had death metal, you had black metal, you had grindcore, you had power metal, you had speed metal, and you had all these different versions of offshoots of what was traditional heavy metal, what you had at the end of the 70s going into 1980. In 1980, it was, it was mostly like Iron Maiden, Saxon, Judas Priest, and Angel Witch, stuff like that. And that stuff wasn't that radically different from each other. But there is a really big difference between Cannibal Corpse and Judas Priest or Deep Purple. There's a big difference between those bands, death metal and traditional metal. Now, how big of a difference is there between Saxon and Iron Maiden? Well, really not much, if any at all, or even Deep Purple and Iron Maiden. Yeah, there's a difference, but the chasm between death metal and traditional metal is pretty wide. So if you're somebody who's into death metal, or you're somebody who's into the more melodic traditional side of things like Iron Maiden and Saxon and Riot and stuff like that, you want to be able to differentiate these bands and know what you're getting into and know what you're searching for. And especially now with the internet, it's there's so much stuff out there that if you just type in rock and roll into Google, you're going to get just millions of different things. And yeah, we could put all these subgenres under one category. And if I had a record store, I would just put them all in the heavy metal section. I'd put all my death metal and all these thrash metal and all that stuff. I would just put that all under the and I'd put a big sign above it that just said heavy metal. Just like in my rock and roll section, I would have Boston and Fleetwood Mac and Dire Straits. I'd have all them in the rock section. But as time goes on, and in order to be able to wade your way through things and to find things, you need to be able to categorize things and break things down. It'd be like if you walked into a library and some massive multi-floor library in your or bookstore, and you said, "Hey, where's the fiction section?" And the librarian said, "Oh, we don't believe in tags and names. They're just all books. You just got to walk around and find it." Well, you probably walk out because you're like, "Whoa, this it would be crazy." And it'd be the same way if I walked into this is a pet peeve of mine. Sometimes I go into used record stores and just everything is just piled everywhere. And sometimes it's not even alphabetized. And they're just like, well, everything is just out there. And I'm just like, I don't want to dig through, have to dig through Lawrence Welk records and country records just to try to find some rock or metal albums. It's too much. There's too much stuff out there. So to keep things sane and for our brains to be able to organize and understand things, we have to sort of break things down. Now, I think the problem is when you have bands that are on the edge of one genre or another. And I've made videos about bands that are called heavy metal that I don't think are heavy metal and stuff like that. You've got a band like Guns N' Roses. Okay, are they really hair metal? Well, they came out of LA, but they don't sound like any of the hair metal bands. Are they hard rock? Yeah, probably. Do they have some metal-ish things about them? Yeah, but they're certainly not metal like Iron Maiden. So again, there's tons of bands like that are sort of on the edge of different subgenres or multiple genres. So it's hard to classify them. So I think that's where people sometimes get frustrated and angry with this whole process when you have bands that don't fit neatly into a particular category. We can all agree that Iron Maiden is heavy metal. I think we can all agree that Cannibal Corpse is death metal. But there's a lot of bands that sort of blur the lines, if you will. So then the other thing is that when I meet, here's an example of something. You meet somebody and you say, "Oh, what kind of music are you into?" And they go, "Oh, I'm into heavy metal." And I think to myself, all right, what exactly do you mean by heavy metal? Because it can mean a whole bunch of different things to a whole bunch of different people. So just for us to have, this guy's definition could be, he could be into Limp Bizkit, which I guess could fall under the heavy metal category. But again, it's a world away from the type of metal that I enjoy and that I listen to. So in a lot of ways, I think it's something that's sort of necessary as time's gone on, and as we've had so many offshoots from rock and heavy metal and things breaking off and splintering from each other. You have to sort of have some way to organize these things in your head, some way to make. I'm on Spotify and I like to explore playlists, and I don't go on a playlist that just says heavy metal. Because 9 times out of 10, I'm going to get Disturbed, and then I'm going to get a Limp Bizkit song. Then there might be an Iron Maiden song. And it's like, I don't have the time for that. I want traditional metal. I want 80s metal. I want thrash metal. I want San Francisco thrash metal. I'd like to be able to break things down and to be able to organize things, and maybe that's a part of me. And I know a lot of metal heads, we like to organize. We have collections. We like to organize our collections and have everything kind of worked out really nicely. And I'm the same way. I like to know what I'm getting into, or at least have a general idea of what I'm getting into before I listen to something. And the world we live in now, where there's just so much stuff out there, that it's almost necessary in order to navigate the internet and the streaming services now. So it's something that I think is necessary, the genre names and the tags that we put on to bands. Is it sometimes over the top and cumbersome? Yeah. I remember once I was in a Borders or a Barnes and Noble or something. This is when they used to have a big music magazine section, and I'm flipping through some metal mag, and there's two guys next to me, and they're in this heated argument about some band, whether this band is Boston beatdown core or whether they're old school New York hardcore. And I'm sort of listening to these guys thinking like, oh my gosh, man, like what? But then I thought to myself, you know what, I do the same thing too. I sometimes listen to bands and I'm like, oh, that's not epic doom metal, that's traditional doom metal. It's traditional Maryland doom metal. So, it's something that's fun. I have fun with it. I think we should all have fun with it, and just accept that, metal and hard rock and roll. It's at its point in its history now, where it sort of needs it needs it in some ways to have some of these lines drawn so we can just sort of organize things in our heads. So, all right, there you go. My opinion on genre names and tags. Do we really need them? Are they necessary? To sum it up, yeah, I think they are necessary. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think. Does it annoy you when you hear bands that have been, a subgenre of a subgenre of a subgenre, or are you okay with it? You don't really care. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think. Make sure you hit like and subscribe. Lair the Alchemist on Facebook. Lair the Alchemist on Twitch for my live streams. Until we see you again, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal. Or at least one of the subgenres of heavy metal.